In this video, I'll walk you through the different types of Windows authentication methods that are supported on Kasm Workspaces. Now, if you haven't watched the previous video, which is a Windows Quick Start video, go ahead and watch that first because that video covers a lot of basic Windows stuff, like how to create a Windows Server record, install the Kasm desktop service, and then register it back to your Kasm Workspaces deployment, etc. etc. So go ahead and watch that video first before you continue with this one. The link to the Windows Quick Start video will be in the description of this video. Anyways, here is our docs page that talks about the different Windows authentication methods, and I'm going to go through each one of them and show you how to configure it on Kasm. So let's start. I have my Kasm deployment up and ready to go. Let me go to Admin, Infrastructure, Servers. You can see I already have two servers. The first one is a domain controller. It's part of an Active Directory network, but we are not going to use this until later in the video when we talk about the Active Directory stuff. And then we have a static Windows server, which is basically not a part of any Active Directory network. It's just a static Windows machine, right? So I've already gone ahead and registered it to my Kasm deployment. And by registering, I mean I have downloaded the Kasm desktop service on the Windows machine, connected it back to my Kasm deployment. Once again, if you want to know how to do that, go ahead and watch the Windows Quick Start video. So let me go ahead and create a new workspace for my Windows OCI static server. I'll go to Workspaces, click on Add Workspace. The workspace type is going to be server. The friendly name, I'm going to say Windows static. Same thing I'll say for the description. And then the server is going to be Windows OCI static. RDP client options, I'll set this to user selectable because I like to have options when launching the workspace. And that's it. Click on save. And if you come back to your workspaces, you now have a Windows static workspace that's linked to my Windows server. So in order to configure the authentication method for this workspace or for this server in general, you can go to your admin panel, go to infrastructure, servers, and then edit the server. Scroll down, and then you will find an option called connection credential type. So you can see there are multiple options over here. You have static credentials, prompt user, dynamic user accounts, SSO user accounts, and authenticate with smart card. So let's start with the most basic one, the static credentials. If I choose static credentials here, it's going to show you two more fields, which are the connection username and the connection password. So this is very simple to understand. You basically put in the credentials to your Windows machine over here. So you can see in my case, I set the username as OPC and I typed the appropriate password for this account in the connection password field. And that's it. So I can go ahead and save it. And I'll go back to Workspaces and then launch the Windows static workspace that I just created. And there you go. I'm now logged in to my remote Windows session with the OPC user account that I configured in my server settings. So it's very simple. Very easy to understand, but there are obviously many cons to this. The first thing is that if you use this method, if you set static credentials for your server, it means all the Kasm users will be logged in as the same user on the Windows system. So this method is obviously not very security oriented because it has account sharing, multiple users sharing the same account. And another disadvantage with this is that only a single concurrent session is allowed per each server. So let's say user 1 has already started a session. It means user 2 will not be able to create a session from his Kasm dashboard until user 1 disconnects from his session. So only one concurrent session is allowed per server at any given point of time. That's another disadvantage. So let's move on to the next one, which is the prompt user. This is also very straightforward. If you go back, I'm going to go ahead and delete this workspace, this session. I'll go back to admin, servers, and then I'll edit my server again, come down, and I'll set the connection credential type to prompt user. And what this does is when you launch a session or when a user launches the session, it's going to prompt the user to type in the credentials. So let me go ahead and save this and show you how it looks like. So I'll go back to Workspaces and launch my Windows static workspace. And as you can see, I am now prompted to enter the credentials for my account in order to log in. So if I type in my password here, I will then be logged in to my Windows session. So once again, this is very simple. And it also allows multiple concurrent sessions per Windows server, which means if user 1 logs in to account 1 on the Windows server, user 2 will be able to log in to the same Windows server on a different account. For example, let's say account 2. So that means multiple concurrent users can have sessions at the same time on one Windows server. And then obviously all the users can have their own different accounts in Windows because they can just log into their own accounts instead of sharing one user account. The disadvantage for this is that users have to enter their credentials every time they connect to a Windows system. So it's not automatic, it's not single sign-on. The user needs to type in their credentials every time they launch a session. In order to configure smart card authentication for Windows on Kasm, you obviously need to make some configurations on your Active Directory side, like to enable the smart card authentication, import certificates, etc., etc. But that is going to be out of scope for this video, and I'm not going to show you that. Instead, I will show you how to configure smart card authentication on your Kasm side and your Windows client side. So firstly, I'll go ahead and trust the RDP signing certificate generated by Kasm so that all the RDP files generated by Kasm will be trusted on your local Windows client when you're opening them to connect to the remote session. So in order to do that, I'll go to my Kasm deployment, I'll go to Settings, Global, and then scroll down, and then I'll copy the RDP public signing certificate, and then I'll save it into a text file. And then I'll use a simple PowerShell command to generate a thumbprint from this certificate. Now I need to import the certificate into my local machine. So I'll just open that certificate, which opens up a window like this. I'll click on Install Certificate, choose Local Machine, click Next, and then I'll select Place all the certificates in the following store. And then I'll select the store as Trusted Root Certificate Authorities, click OK, click Next, and then click Finish. So now the RDP signing certificate is installed on my local Windows client. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add my thumbprint, which I just generated from the certificate, to my group policy. So I'll open my group policy editor. I'll go to Computer Configuration, Administrative Templates, Windows Components, and then find Remote Desktop Services. Then go to Remote Desktop Connection Client. And over here, you will find a setting called Specify SHA-1 thumbprints of certificates representing trusted RDP publishers. So I'm going to double click on it to edit it. And this accepts a comma separated list of thumbprints. So you can put in your thumbprint here and click apply. And that's it. Now all the RDP files that are generated by Kasm when you use the RDP client in Kasm will be trusted by your local Windows client by default. Next thing you need to do is you need to enable a particular group setting on Kasm so that you allow smart card pass-through to the Windows sessions. To do that, go to Access Management and then go to Groups. Over here, select the group that you desire, click Edit, and then go to the Settings tab and click Add Settings and search for a setting called Allow Kasm RDP Smart Card Pass-Through and set its value to True. And that's basically it. So I'm going to go to my server settings and I'm going to set my connection credential type to authenticate with smart card because that's what I'm going to do. And let me also go ahead and create a new workspace for my server. And over here, I'm going to set the RDP client options to RDP local client and click Save. It is also very important to note that you need to have trusted certs on your Kasm deployment in order to use the RDP client to connect to your remote session. Otherwise, you will have to go ahead and disable the RDP HTTPS gateway and use the normal RDP HTTP gateway. So let me go ahead and launch my Windows workspace here. And as you can see, it downloads an RDP file and you see this warning because I don't have trusted certs on my Kasm deployment. But if you do, this warning will not be displayed. So I'm going to click on Yes, and it connects me to my Windows session. And over here, I can click on Sign In options and I can choose my smart card, enter my PIN, and there you go. I am now logged in to my Windows session. Now it's also worth noting that starting from Kasm Workspaces 1.18, which is our upcoming release at the time of making this video, we also support smart card pass-through to web-native Windows sessions instead of just RDP thick client sessions. So in other words, you will also be able to do smart card authentication on your web-native Guac Windows sessions on Windows, macOS, and Chrome OS clients. In order to do that, you will have to install our new Kasm Smart Card Native Client Bridge application. It is available for both Windows and macOS. If you have a Chrome OS client, you don't have to install this native client app. And then once you do that, you can go to the Chrome Web Store and install the Kasm Smart Card Bridge Chrome extension, which works with the Smart Card native client app that you installed to provide smart card pass-through support for web-native Windows sessions. And obviously, you also need to have the group setting enabled. And in 118, the group setting is named as Allow Kasm Smart Card Pass-Through. So there is a small change in the group setting name as well. So once you have all these three things, you can go ahead and launch a Windows session using the web native client. And in the control panel, you can now see a new option called Smart Card. And if you click on it, you can see the status of the smart card pass-through. So in this case, it says Chrome extension is enabled, reader is connected, and the card is inserted as well. So that means the smart card pass-through is working, and I can test it by authenticating against a test server like this, which asks for my PIN. And there you go. As you can see, the authentication is successful. So go ahead and upgrade to our latest version 1.18 if you want to have these smart card pass-through enhancements. Also go ahead and check out the release video of 118 release if you want to learn the list of new features that we are bringing in 118. Next up, we have single sign-on with static local accounts. In order to use this authentication type, the remote Windows machine will need to have local accounts that match the username and password of the Kasm users. So in other words, the user credentials on Kasm must match the credentials on your Windows machine so that Kasm will be able to pass the credentials of the Kasm users to the remote Windows session, which will then be able to authenticate. So let me go ahead and demo this for you. I'll go back, I'll delete my Windows static session here, and then I'll go to Admin, Access Management, Users. So let me go ahead and create a new user here. I'll set the username as Teja. I'll set a password for it and click Save. So I now have a new user and I need to create the same user with the same password on the Windows machine. So let me go ahead and RDP into my Windows machine here. So over here, I'll go ahead and add a new user. Click on Add Someone Else to this PC. Click on I don't have this person's sign-in information. And it's going to ask you by default to enter a Microsoft account. But you don't need to do that. You can just click on Add a user without a Microsoft account. And then you can type in the username and password. Once again, both the username and the password should match with the username and password on Kasm. So I'm going to set this username to Teja. And then I'm going to set the same password that I set for my Kasm account. Click on Next. And there you go. I have now created a new user account. I also need to give RDP access to this newly created user account. And to do that, I'll search for remote desktop settings. I'll click on select users that can remotely access this PC. And over here, I'll click on add and I'll search for my newly created user account and then add it and click OK. So now this new user account that I created will be able to RDP into this Windows machine. So let me go ahead and close my RDP session. I'll go back to Kasm, go to servers, once again, edit my server. And this time I'll set the connection credential type to SSO user accounts. And when you set it to SSO user accounts, it's going to add a new field called SSO domain. So this, if you're trying to do SSO with LDAP, you would want to fill this with your Active Directory domain. But since we're not using LDAP here, since we're not using Active Directory here, and we are basically just trying to pass the credentials from Kasm to the Windows machine, we are just going to set this to localhost. So you need to set this to localhost and then click on Save. And that's it. If I go back to Workspaces, and if I try to launch this session, it would fail because I'm currently logged in as admin at kasm.local. So when I launch this session, the credentials of this user is going to be passed to the remote Windows session, and they don't exist because there's no user account on my Windows machine with these credentials. So I'm going to sign out. and then log back in with my newly created Kasm account, which is Teja. And now I'm going to go ahead and launch my Windows static workspace. And you can see I'm now logged in. So if I open my command prompt and type in who am I, you can see I am Teja. This is the same user account that I just created. So once again, the pros for this authentication method is that it allows for multiple concurrent users to have sessions on the Windows server at the same time because there is no account sharing. Each individual user can have their own account on the Windows server. And the disadvantage for this authentication type is kind of obvious. You need to create matching user accounts on your Windows server. So whatever user accounts you have on Kasm, you need to create the same user accounts with the same username and password on your remote Windows machine as well for this authentication method to work. So this obviously involves complexity in managing user accounts on your Windows machine. Let's move on to the next authentication type, which is single sign-on with dynamic local accounts. In order to use this authentication type, you need to have Kasm desktop service installed, which is already installed in my case. The reason for that is that Kasm desktop service is going to dynamically create local user accounts on your Windows machine whenever a session request is created on Kasm. So let's say a user on your Kasm is trying to launch a Windows workspace, a Windows session. When the user launches the session, the Kasm desktop service that's running on your Windows machine is going to dynamically create a new local user account and then provide access to the Windows machine with this newly created local account for that session. So if you want to know how this works, you can actually go to our Kasm desktop service documentation. And then we have something known as built-in scripts, which are basically PowerShell scripts that are pre-installed when you're installing the Kasm desktop service. And then the first script, which is the create local account.ps1, this is a script that gets executed when you're doing SSO with dynamic local user accounts. So when this script is executed, it's going to create a new local user account on your Windows machine with a randomly generated password. Now, you can obviously go ahead and modify this script on your Windows machine to accommodate your requirements. For example, if you have a password policy, you can implement that password policy inside the script and you can do other stuff like that. So you can customize it according to your requirements. Anyway, let me go ahead and demo this for you. I'll go back, delete my session, and I'll also log back in as the admin. Go to infrastructure, servers, edit the server once again, scroll down and set the credential type to dynamic user accounts. And that's basically it. Click on save and I'll go back to workspaces and then launch my workspace. And I now have a Windows session. Let me open my command prompt. And if I type in who am I, you can see this is the dynamic local user account that Kasm desktop service has created. Now, if you're wondering what this username is, our documentation actually talks about it. The username generated by Kasm is the first 9 characters of the Kasm Workspace username in lowercase, with special characters replaced by a hyphen followed by a hyphen, and then 10 characters from the Kasm Workspaces user ID. So this username is basically a combination of your Kasm username and your Kasm user ID, which is like a UUID, something like this. So if I go to my file explorer, go to local disk C, program files, Kasm. Here is the directory where the Kasm desktop service is installed. And if you go to your scripts folder, you will find a folder that says built-in. This is the built-in scripts that I was talking about earlier. If you go inside it, you can see the pre-installed scripts. As I said, the first script, which is create local account.ps1, is the script that gets executed for this authentication type. So as you can see, this is a very clean way of doing SSO pass-through from your Kasm Workspaces deployment to your remote Windows machine. You don't need to create matching user accounts on your Windows machine. The Kasm desktop service is going to dynamically do that for you with a randomly generated password. So you don't even have to handle or manage your Windows user account passwords. Everything is done by Kasm. So there are a lot of pros for this authentication method. The first one is that obviously it allows for multiple concurrent user sessions per Windows server because every Kasm user gets his own local user account on the Windows machine. And since we are doing SSO from Kasm to Windows, the user will not be prompted to enter their credentials. In fact, the user does not need to know their credentials on the Windows machine. That's all handled by Kasm. And then this also works with any authentication like OIDC, SAML, LDAP, local Kasm accounts. So you can configure it for all these authentication types. And it's also very simple to configure. Next up, we have single sign-on with Active Directory. So let's say you have a pool of Windows machines in an Active Directory network. You can do single sign-on to those Windows machines from Kasm by making use of LDAP. To do this, you need to first create an LDAP configuration on your Kasm Workspaces. So I'll go back to Kasm, go to my admin panel, go to Access Management, Authentication, and then go to LDAP. So I'll go ahead and click on Add Configuration here. And I'll name this as Windows OCI 80. OCI because this Active Directory network is on Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. And then the URL is going to be your LDAP connection URL to your LDAP server. So you can go ahead and use LDAP S if you have it enabled. In my case, I don't have LDAP S enabled, so I'm just going to use the normal LDAP. So I'm going to type in LDAP :/ followed by the IP address of my domain controller. So I'll copy it here and paste it, the port. The port for LDAP is going to be 389, so I'll type the same here. If you're using LDAP S, you need to change the port to 636, and you also need to change the schema to LDAP S instead of LDAP. The search base takes in the base OU used for searching for objects inside the LDAP. So in my case, let me go ahead and log in to my domain controller first. So this is my domain controller, and as you can see, I have one domain, kasm.company.local, and I want my search base to be the root of my domain, which is kasm.company.local. So what I'll do over here is I'll go to View, I make sure that Advanced Features is selected, and then right click on kasm.company.local, which is my domain, go to Properties, go to Attribute Editor, and then copy my distinguished name, the DN. So I'll just copy this and paste it into my search base. You can obviously change this to the DN of whatever OU you want the search base to be. In my case, I just want it to be my root domain, which is kasm.company.local. And then the search filter, this is basically used to identify the user account names. I'll use the default search filter, which is this right here. I'll leave the search subtree enabled. And then you also need a service account so that Kasm will be able to make LDAP queries to your LDAP server. So to create a service account, I'll go back to my RDP. This is my domain controller. I'll go to Users, right click, click on New, click on User. And then I will name this as Kasm Service Bot. And then the user logon name, I'll set this to Kasm Service Bot. Click Next. And then I'll unselect this option that says user must change password at next logon. And you can also enable password never expires if you don't want your service account password to expire. But that is obviously a security risk and we do not recommend you do that. So I'll just leave it unchecked. So when you leave it unchecked, what it means is that the password for your Kasm service account is going to expire based on your policies. And when it expires, Kasm will no longer be able to make LDAP queries. So you got to keep an eye on that. So I'll go ahead and choose a password for my service account and then click Finish. And there you go. A new account called Kasm Service Bot has been created over here. Awesome. So now I need to get the DN of this service account. So I'll right click on it, go to Properties, and then go to Attribute Editor, scroll down, and then I'll double click on distinguished name and I'll copy this DN value. I'll go back, paste it in my service account DN. And I also need to input the service account password that I just configured so that Kasm will be able to authenticate with this service account to make the LDAP queries. And then we have group membership filter. And the reason why we need this group membership filter is if you're trying to do Kasm group to LDAP group mapping, which we will do in a little while, Kasm is going to need a filter, a search filter that searches for all the groups that are associated with a particular user. So I'm going to go ahead and use a default search filter like this, which basically does a recursive search. And once again, this 0 right here is going to be replaced with the actual search value, which is going to be the DN of the user account when Kasm actually does this search. And if you're wondering where I got that search filter from, it's mentioned in our docs. The link will be in the description below. And that's it. If you have alternate username domains for your Active Directory, you can paste them here, but I don't have any, so I'm just going to leave this empty and click on Save. So the LDAP config has been created. The best practice is to test this LDAP connection once it's created. So I'll click on this arrow icon right here and then click on Test LDAP Connection. And this is going to ask me for a test username and password. So you can type in the username and password of any Active Directory user. For this demo, let me just type in the username and password of my Kasm service account. So I'll type in Kasm service bot at kasm.company.local, which is my domain name, and then the password. Click on test connection. And you can see on the top right corner, it says that the connection is successful, which means this LDAP config is functional. It is working. All right, now that I have an LDAP configuration, let me go back to my domain controller and let me create a new user account. So I'll right click on users, click on new user, and then I'll just name it as test user. Click next, and then choose a password for it. Click next, and then finish. Awesome. So we have now a new user whose username is going to be testuser@kasm.company.local. So let me go back to my Kasm dashboard and let me log out of my admin account. And now let me try to log in with this test user that I just created. So I'll type in testuser@kasm.company.local because that's the username of my Active Directory user that I just created. And then also type in the password, click login, and there you go. I am able to log into my Kasm Workspaces with my LDAP user. In some cases, you may not want your user to explicitly mention the domain name in the username while logging into Kasm. To achieve that, go to LDAP, edit your LDAP config, scroll down, and then you will find a field that says alternate username domains. Over here, you can use an asterisk to match usernames without a domain name. So if I just type in an asterisk like this, click on save. Now, whenever an LDAP user logs into Kasm, the user does not have to specify the domain name in the username. Let me show you how that works. I'm going to log out. I'm going to log in as test user, and you can see I am not mentioning my domain name. I'm just saying test user as the email. And then I'll type in the password, click login, and there you go. Even though I did not mention my domain name in the email, I am still able to log into my Kasm deployment. So before I go ahead and actually show you how to do SSO pass-through with Active Directory, let me go ahead and add a domain joined machine to my Kasm deployment. So here I have a Windows machine already provisioned on OCI that has joined my Active Directory network. So I have gone ahead and created a new server record for my domain joined machine. You can see this is the server record that says Windows OCI AD joined. It's in the running state. So basically I installed the Kasm desktop service and then registered it with my Kasm deployment. So in order for your Active Directory users to be able to log in to your domain joined machine, you need to create some policies so that they will be able to RDP into this domain joined machine here or any domain joined machine. To do that, I'll go back to my domain controller. I'll open my Active Directory users and computers. And over here, I'll go ahead and create a new group called Kasm users. So I'll right click on users, click on new, select group. You can create a group at a different OU if you like, but I'm just going to do it in the default users OU. I'm going to name this group as Kasm users because these are the users who are going to be logged in from Kasm deployment. So I basically want to group them together so that I can give the necessary permissions to them to RDP into domain joined machines. Click on next, and you can see the group is now created. So I need to now add my users to this group. I'll go ahead and add the test user that I just created. So I'll double click, go to the member of tab, and then click on add, and then type in Kasm users here, check name. There you go. This is the group that I just created. Click OK and click apply. And now my test user has been added to my Kasm users group. So I'll click OK. And same way, I can go ahead and add multiple user accounts like this. For example, just for this demo, let me add another user account. So I'll right click, click on new, click on user, And this time I will name it as test user2 at kasm.company.local. Click next, choose a password, click next, and then click finish. And then I'll also add this new user to my Kasm users group. So I'll once again go to the member of tab, click on add, and add it to my Kasm users group. Awesome. So similarly, you can add multiple users to the Kasm users group. And the reason why I'm grouping them together is so that I'll be able to give them the necessary permissions so that they can RDP into the Windows machines in the Active Directory from Kasm. That's one reason for doing that. The other reason is that I can link this Active Directory group to my Kasm group, so that whenever a user of this group logs in to my Kasm Workspaces, he will be also added to a particular Kasm group, so that I'll be able to manage my Active Directory users on Kasm properly. So now that I have created a group and added my users to the group, I need to now give the group the necessary permission. So to do that, I need to create a new group policy object. So I'll open my run menu, type in gpmc.msc, and over here I'll go to my forest and then domains. I have only one domain, kasm.company.local, so I'll click on it, and I want to create a new GPO directly under this domain. You don't have to do that. You can link it to a particular OU if you want, but just to keep things simple, I'm going to create a new GPO and link it directly under kasm.company.local, directly under my domain name. So I'll right click, select create a GPO in this domain and link it here. And I'll name this GPO as RDP policy. Click OK. I'll right click my created GPO and click edit. I'll go to computer configuration, policies, Windows settings, security settings, local policies, and then go to user rights assignment. Over here, I need to change a setting that says allow logon through remote desktop services. Just double click on it. And here is where you can add a particular user or group. So I'll select this checkbox that says define these policy settings. Click on add user or group. And then I'll add my Kasm users group here. And then I'll also add in my administrators group and click apply and then OK. So now I have allowed RDP access to both my built-in administrators group and my Kasm users Active Directory group. There is another setting that I need to change here. And to do that, I'll go to computer configuration, go to preferences, control panel settings, local users and groups. And over here, I'm going to create a new group. I'll right click, select new, select local group, and I'll name this local group as remote desktop users. So this is a local group that exists on every Windows machine, and the users who are part of this group will be able to actually RDP into that particular Windows machine. So for the members, I'll once again click on add, and I'll first add the Kasm users group and also add the administrator. That's it. I'll go ahead and click apply, click OK, and we are good to go. So now all the domain joined Windows machine in the Active Directory network will allow RDP access to all the users who are in the Kasm users group. All right, now let me go ahead and create a new workspace for my domain joined Windows machine for this server right here. So I'll go to workspaces, click on add workspace, select the workspace type to server. Friendly name, I'll set this to Windows OCI domain joined. Same thing for the description. Select the server, I'll select this one. RDP client options, I'll set this to user selectable and click save. And I also need to change the authentication type for my domain joined Windows machine. So I'll click on edit. I'll scroll down and I'll set the connection credential type to SSO user accounts. And the SSO domain is going to be kasm.company.local. because that's the domain name of my Active Directory. Click on save. All right, I'm now going to log out of my admin account, and I'm going to log in back with my Active Directory account. So I'll log in with test user at kasm.company.local and the password. Awesome, I'm now in. Let me go ahead and launch the Windows OCI domain joined workspace that I just created, which is connected to my Windows machine that's joined to the Active Directory network. Click on launch session. And I am now logged in. So let me open my command prompt. If I type in who am I, you can see I am Kasm/test user. So that means I'm now able to log in to a Windows machine that's part of an Active Directory network by making use of my Active Directory account directly from Kasm using the LDAP configuration that I just created. As I already said, you can also create an LDAP linked group inside Kasm so that whenever a user of a particular LDAP group logs into Kasm, that user will also be added to a Kasm group. So to do that, I'll go back to my Kasm admin panel, go to access management and then groups. I'll go ahead and create a new group and I'll just call it AD users, Active Directory users. I'll set the priority to 10, click on save. And now I'll go ahead and edit this group. I'll go to the SSO group mappings, click on add SSO mapping, and then choose my LDAP config. And then I can enable this option that says assign all users. And when I do this, it's going to assign all the users that logged in via this LDAP configuration to this AD users group. So it's not going to do any matching. It's not going to check if that particular user is part of a particular Active Directory group. Before adding it, it will just assign all the users. But if you don't want to do that, and if you only want to add users of a particular Active Directory group, you can just disable this. And here you need to enter the DN of the Active Directory group. So I'll go back to my domain controller, go to Active Directory users and groups. And for this demo, let's say I want to add all the users of my Kasm users Active Directory group to this particular group right here. So to do that, I'll need to copy the DN of my Kasm users group. I'll double click on it, go to attribute editor, and then copy the distinguished name, go back and paste it over here. So this means all the users of the Kasm users group will be automatically linked or mapped to my Kasm group, which is named as AD users. So let me go ahead to users and let me just delete my test user at kasm.company.local. And then let me sign out and then sign in back with my test user account, test user at kasm.company.local, and then the password. So I'm now logged in with my test user Active Directory account, which is also part of my Kasm users Active Directory group. This user must be automatically linked to my Kasm group. So let me go ahead and check that. I'll log out back again, and then I'll log in with my admin account. I'll go to access management users, and you can see I now have a new user called test user at kasm.company.local. So if I go to edit and if I go to the groups tab, you can see this user account is now part of the AD users group. So we are able to automatically link an Active Directory account to a Kasm group based on the Active Directory group. You can also do LDAP attribute mapping, where you can basically map LDAP attributes to a user record. For example, in Kasm, a user record contains these fields: first name, last name, phone, organization, nodes, etc., etc. So you can actually populate these user fields with different LDAP attributes. So to do that, go back to your Kasm admin panel, access management, authentication, LDAP, click edit, and then go to the attribute mapping tab, click on add SSO mapping. And here you can choose the user field that you want to populate. For example, let me choose notes here, or let me choose first name here, and then the LDAP attribute that you want to map to this particular field. So in order to find out all the available LDAP attributes, you can do a simple LDAP query. So I'll go back to my domain controller here, open up PowerShell, and I'll execute a simple command like this that gets all the properties of the user test user. Hit enter. And here I have all the LDAP attributes of this particular user named test user. So for example, let me map two attributes. Let me map the given name to the first name in Kasm, and let me also map the distinguished name to the notes field in Kasm, right? So I'll go back to Kasm, and for the first name, the LDAP attribute is going to be given name. So I'll copy, paste it here. And when you're setting LDAP attributes in Kasm, they need to follow the camel case. So the first letter is going to be a lowercase letter. It's going to be something like this. Click on add, and the attribute is now added. Click on add SSO mapping again. And this time I want to map to the notes field. And the LDAP attribute that I want to use is this one, distinguished name. I'll copy it, paste it here, and then change this to camel case. Basically change the first letter to lowercase. Click add, and these two are now added. Let me go ahead and open up Kasm in a new private window, and let me log in with my Active Directory user account, testuser2 at kasm.company.local. I'm logged in. So I'll go back to my admin panel, go to users, and there you go. I have a new user called testuser2 at kasm.company.local. If I click on edit and scroll down, you can see the first name field is automatically populated with the given name LDAP attribute, which is test. And then the notes field is also automatically populated with the distinguished name of my user. So in the same way, I can map multiple LDAP attributes to my user fields in Kasm. Now let's talk about AD sync, Active Directory sync, which is another awesome feature that Kasm offers. Until now, you've seen that when an LDAP user or an Active Directory user logs into Kasm, Kasm will be able to make use of the LDAP configuration and then authenticate that user against the LDAP server. And then it creates a user account for that LDAP user. And if the authentication is successful, it'll create a Kasm user account for that LDAP user, for that Active Directory user. But what if you have a user account from a different source other than LDAP, other than Active Directory? Let's say you have an OIDC user account, or just like a local Kasm user account, which is not part of an LDAP server. In that case, the user account can be created on Kasm, but that particular user will not be able to connect to a remote Windows session in an Active Directory network. This is where AD sync comes in. Kasm can manage user accounts in Microsoft Active Directory by automatically creating accounts in AD and resetting the user's password in AD to a randomly generated password on each login. So what this means is when a user logs into Kasm and that user is not part of any Active Directory network, Kasm will automatically trigger a job that will create a new user account in the Active Directory for this new user. So if the user is authenticated from a different source, like from a SAML or OIDC identity provider, you can make use of AD sync to sync your user accounts with your Active Directory network. So let me come back to my Kasm deployment here. I'll go to Access Management, Authentication, LDAP, and then I'll edit my LDAP config. And over here, I'll go to the AD sync tab, click on Add, and you can choose the type. For example, you can choose OIDC or SAML. For this demo, I'm just going to set this to local. You can enable a random password at login, and Kasm will set a random password for the user to log in to Active Directory. So I'll just go ahead and enable that. I'll also enable create user, which basically means that Kasm will create an Active Directory user if it doesn't already exist. So I'll enable that as well. You can also go ahead and enable AD group management if you want Kasm to be able to synchronize the Kasm group membership to the AD groups. For this demo, I'm just going to leave this disabled. You can set a password length. For example, I'll set it to 12. And then you also need the DN of the user container where you want the user objects to be placed. In my case, let me go back to my domain controller here, and I'm going to choose the default users OU. You don't need to use this. You can use an OU of your choice, but to keep things simple for this demo, I'm just going to use the default users OU. So I'll right click on it, go to properties, go to attribute editor, and then I'll copy the distinguished name. Go back and paste it here. Click on add, and the AD sync is now active. Now, another very important thing that you need to configure before you can get AD sync to work is you need to give the appropriate permissions to your Kasm service account. So I'll go back to my domain controller again, and I have my Kasm service bot here, and I need to give the appropriate permissions to this account so that it will be able to create and delete user accounts. To do that, I need to delegate control to the appropriate OU. Since I'm using the default users OU, I'll right click on it, click on delegate control. I'll click next. I'll go ahead and click on add, and I'll add Kasm service bot. Click OK, click next. I'll choose create a custom task to delegate, click next again. I'll select only the following objects in this folder. I'll scroll down and I'll choose user objects, and I'll also select create selected objects in this folder and delete selected objects in this folder. Over here, you need to set the appropriate permissions. For this demo, to just keep things simple, I'm choosing full control, but you should not do it. We do not recommend that you give full permissions. You need to do some more research on what permissions are actually required for a user account to be able to create and delete user objects. But for this demo, I'm just choosing full control over here. Click next, click finish, and this user account has now the appropriate rights to create and delete user objects. There's another thing that you need to change in your LDAP configuration. So come back to your edit tab, scroll down until you find alternate username domains. And over here, you need to list all the alternate username domains that you will be using. For example, if you're using an OIDC authentication source, the domain for that may be different from your Active Directory domain. My Active Directory domain, as you can see, is kasm.company.local, but my OIDC domain may not be the same. In this case, since I'm just using the local realm, the domain name for my local realm is going to be kasm.local. So I'm going to set this as an alternate domain name. In the same way, you can add alternate username domains here. And that's it. I'll go ahead and click on save. So now let me go to access management and then users, and let me create a new user as Teja at kasm.local. I'll choose a password, choose a realm as local, and click on save. So you can see the user is now created. Let me now go ahead and log in to my Kasm deployment with my newly created user account. So I log in as Teja at kasm.local. And I'm now logged in. So now that I've logged in with my new user account, Kasm should sync this user to the Active Directory and basically create a new user object with this username and a randomly generated password. So let me go back to my domain controller here. I'll go back to my users OU and let me refresh. And there you go. You can see a new user account has been created by Kasm. So another thing that you can do with AD Sync is you can enable this AD group management so that whenever a new user is created, you can also set it so that the new user will be automatically added to a particular group in your Active Directory, like for example, the Kasm users group. In that way, you can give all the newly created users access to your domain joined machines because they are part of the group that has that permission. So in this way, you can efficiently manage which users get to access which machines in your AD environment. With Kasm, you can also auto-scale resources like Windows machines, and when you auto-scale or provision new Windows machines, you can also have them automatically join an Active Directory network. And let me show you how to do that. So here in my setup, I have a Harvester Home Lab where there is a Windows Server 2022 VM running, and this is a domain controller of an Active Directory network. And currently this is the only machine in the Active Directory network. But what we want to essentially do is we want to auto scale new Windows machines and have them join to this Active Directory network. So that's what we're going to do. Over here, I have my Kasm deployment. This is a different Kasm deployment from before. This is also running on a vSphere Home Lab. I've already gone ahead and configured the LDAP configuration. So if I go to Access Management, Authentication, LDAP, you can see I already have an LDAP config here. What you can also notice is that this is using LDAP-S instead of LDAP. And this is also a requirement for Kasm to auto-join newly provisioned Windows VMs into an Active Directory network. It will not work if you don't have LDAP-S enabled and configured in Kasm. There's already a dedicated video on our YouTube channel that talks about how to do auto-scaling on Harvester. You can go ahead and watch that video. We also have videos for other providers like Proxmox, vSphere, DigitalOcean, etc., and all of them are in one place in a YouTube playlist, which will be linked in the description below, so you can go check out those videos. In this video, I am going to configure autoscaling with Harvester, but I'm not going to explain each and every option because that's already done in its own dedicated video. So before actually configuring the autoscaling, it's very important that you make sure that your Kasm service account or service bot has the appropriate permissions to add and remove computer objects in your AD network. So I'm on my domain controller right now, and you can see I have a Kasm service bot, which is what Kasm is using to talk to the LDAP. And basically, I need to give it the proper permissions so that it can add or remove computer objects from the computer's OU. So to do that, I'll right click on computers, click on delegate control, and then this widget comes up, click on next, and then I will add my Kasm service bot account, which is this one. Click next, and then I'll choose create a custom task to delegate, click next again, and I'll say only the following objects in this folder, and I'll select computer objects, and then I'll select create selected objects in this folder as well as delete selected objects in this folder. So it has permissions to both create computer records or computer objects as well as delete them. Click next again. And over here, you can choose the list of permissions that you want to assign. Just for the sake of this demo and to keep things simple, I'm just going to give it full control, but we do not recommend you do that. You need to do proper research on what permissions are required for your use case. In this case, I'm just giving it full control to keep things simple. Click next again, click finish, and there you go. Now my Kasm service account has the appropriate permissions. All right, now I'll come back to my Kasm deployment. So in order to configure autoscaling, you need to first create a pool. So I'll go to infrastructure, pools, and then click on add to create a new pool. I'll name it as Windows pool. And then I'll select the type as server, click save. And now I'll create an autoscale config. So I'll click on all autoscale configs, click add, and then I'll name it as harvester autoscale config. And in the brackets, I'll just say AD. So I know that it's part of an Active Directory. I'll select the autoscale type to server. This should match the pool type. And then I'll select the pool that I just created. Select the deployment zone, downscale back off. Now, I'm not going to explain these options to you. If you want to know what these options mean and how to set them, we recommend you watch the autoscale overview video, which will be linked in the description. I'll enable require server check-in and Kasm desktop service installed because all my autoscaled VMs will have the Kasm desktop service installed with the help of the autoscale startup scripts that we will be using in some time. Select the connection type to RDP. The port is 3389. Credential type will be SSO user accounts because I'm using my LDAP config for it. Connection SSO username domain is going to be kasm2.company.local, which is my AD domain name. And then this is the important part. I'm going to enable this option that says create Active Directory computer record. So when I enable this, that tells Kasm that when it provisions a new VM on Harvester, in this case, it also needs to join that particular VM to my Active Directory. So I'll choose my LDAP config here. And then I also need to enter the distinguished name of my computer OU. So I'll go back to my Active Directory, and this is my computer's OU. I'll right click on it, go to properties, go to attribute editor, and then double click on distinguished name, and I'll just copy this entire thing and I'll paste it in Kasm. And then you can enable this option if you want to recursively clean up the Active Directory computer record. For this demo, I'm just going to leave it disabled. I'm also going to enable reusable so that the same VM can be reused for multiple sessions. I'll set the minimum available sessions to 1, maximum simultaneous sessions per server to also 1. Click next. And over here, I'm going to use the Harvester provider. So I'll select the provider as Harvester, and I'll name it as Harvester config. Set the maximum instances to 2. And then here is where I need to fill in the provider specific details from my Harvester deployment. Once again, I'm not going to explain what these options mean and where to get them from because we already have a dedicated autoscale video for Harvester, which will also be linked in the description below. It's also in our Autoscale playlist on YouTube. So you can go ahead and watch that video. Not only Harvester, we have videos for other providers as well, like Proxmox, vSphere, DigitalOcean, OCI, etc. So you can find all those videos in our Autoscale YouTube playlist, which will be linked in the description below. So I'm gonna quickly fill in these details from my Harvester deployment. And then finally, I need to configure the startup script. The startup script, as the name suggests, is a script that will get executed as soon as the VM is provisioned on the backend provider. So Kasm is going to pass this startup script to the newly provisioned VM and it gets executed on its startup. Now usually, since we enabled the Kasm desktop service installed option in the previous screen, that means we need to install the Kasm desktop service and have it connect back to our Kasm deployment. So in other words, we are having the provisioned VM to connect back or to register itself with our Kasm deployment. So we have a public GitHub repo where we maintain all our Autoscale startup scripts, and I'm going to use the scripts from this repo right here. So if you can see here, there are different branches, each branch for each release, and you can choose the right branch based on your Kasm version. I'm going to select develop because we have improved or enhanced our Autoscale startup scripts starting in 1.18, which is going to be based off of this develop branch. And these Autoscale startup scripts are actually compatible for Kasm Workspaces 1.18, 1.17, as well as 1.16.1. So if you use any of these three Kasm versions, we recommend that you use our updated, enhanced Autoscale startup scripts. But if you're using an older version of Kasm, then you might want to switch to that particular branch. For example, if you're using the 1.15 release, you might want to switch to that branch and use the scripts documented there instead. But if you're on any of these three latest Kasm versions, then we recommend that you use the enhanced Autoscale startup scripts because they are much easier to use and much more graceful. So I'm going to scroll down and here you can see an example snippet. So basically the way these scripts are intended to use is you can use a wrapper script like this, which then downloads the actual startup scripts that contain the logic to do various stuff like install the Kasm desktop service, do a domain join, or provide FS logic support, etc., and then executes those scripts as necessary. So as I said, this is a wrapper script, and this is a script that you actually pass to Kasm that you fill in this field right here, and then that script will in turn download the actual startup scripts and do the startup operations that you want. So I'm going to copy this snippet right here to my startup script. And then I also need to insert an appropriate execution command and basically define what I want to do with the startup scripts. So we have some examples on how to do that. This is an example execution command where you basically define the Kasm hostname, which will download and install the Kasm desktop service. And then if you mention a domain name like this, it will also do a domain join to the mentioned domain. And then you also need to pass in the Active Directory credentials. If you're trying to do domain join, you can also define DNS servers, etc., etc. I am going to use this example right here, which basically just installs the Kasm desktop service and then registers it with my Kasm deployment. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it here. And in addition to just installing and registering the Kasm desktop service, I also want my VMs to join my Active Directory. Right? So I'll go back to the README here, and there is an example on how to do domain join as well. And all these options, all these parameters are well documented here. For example, if you can see, to do a domain join, you need these 4 attributes or parameters. The first one is the domain name, where you basically mention the Active Directory domain that you want your VMs to join. And then the domain join credential is something that Kasm handles in the backend to authenticate against your LDAP server, create the computer object, and then link it with your newly provisioned VM. And then the DNS servers is where you define the DNS servers for your VM. The reason we have this parameter is because if you want to join a particular VM to an Active Directory domain, that particular domain name should be resolvable. And in order for that, you need to have the appropriate DNS servers configured. You can obviously configure these DNS servers while you're creating the Windows template, or you could do it this way by just passing them as a variable. And as you can see, this is optional. And you can also define the server name, which is also optional. So I'm going to use the first three options, which is the domain name, Active Directory credential, and the DNS servers. So let's copy these three parameters and put them in my startup script field. Now notice how I used a backtick here to continue with the rest of the parameters. That's because the backtick tells PowerShell to treat the next following line as the continuation for that command. So if you don't have a backtick here, it would not work. So that's important. And I'll remove the final backtick here because that's the end of the command. Or you could just make it a one-line command and that would work as well. So that's basically it. And obviously make sure that you change the DNS server IP address. In my case, I'm going to set this to my domain controller's IP, which is going to be 192.168.100.191. So all the values that are enclosed within braces will be automatically substituted by Kasm. You don't need to manually hardcode them in the command. In this case, the only parameter that you actually need to manually define here is the DNS server. That's the only command you need to hardcode in this execution command. All the other values will be automatically passed and substituted by Kasm. So you don't need to worry about them. And that's basically it. So I'll just go ahead and click on finish. And this should automatically trigger the auto scaling job. And it should now try and provision a new VM on my harvester. So if I go back to my harvester, go to virtual machines, you can see a new VM is being provisioned. So once this VM is provisioned, Kasm is going to pass the startup script to it, and that startup script is going to be executed, which eventually downloads and installs the Kasm desktop service, registers it with my Kasm deployment, and also joins this particular VM to my Active Directory. So it's going to take a little while. It depends on your backend provider. So I'm going to wait like 5 to 7 minutes and I'll be right back once this VM is ready to use. So while the provisioning is actually taking place, you can still go ahead and track the status of the startup scripts being executed on your provisioned VM. For example, this is my autoscaled VM on Harvester, and I can simply RDP into it to track the status or even troubleshoot my autoscale startup scripts. So I've gone ahead and RDP'd into my autoscaled VM right here. And in order to look for the logs generated by the startup scripts, I'll open my file explorer. I'll go to this PC, local disk C, users, Cloudbase init, and then over here, I'll view all the hidden items, which should uncover the app data folder. I'll go into it, I'll go to local, temp, and this is where all the startup scripts will be downloaded and all the logs are also generated here. You can see there is a file called Kasm startup script, which is a log file. So I can just open it and you can see the logs associated with this startup script. So it looks like it has downloaded and installed the Kasm desktop service and also joined the machine to my Active Directory domain. I can confirm that by just right clicking on PC, going to properties, and you can see the full device name here. It is associated with my Active Directory domain, which is kasm2.company.local, which says that it has indeed joined my AD. I can confirm the same on my domain controller. So if I come back to my domain controller here and refresh the computer's OU, you can see there is a new computer record, which is nothing but my autoscaled VM. And I can also go back to my Kasm deployment to check the status of my autoscaled server. So if I go to infrastructure and then go to servers, you can see I now have a new autoscaled VM or server, and it's in the running state. So whenever you see the status of a server is running, it means it is ready to be used. In other words, the Kasm desktop service was successfully installed on the VM, and it has also registered itself with my Kasm deployment, and it's basically ready to use. That'll be all for this video. Thanks for watching. All the related documentation and guides will be linked in the description below, so make sure to check the description.